Hello, everybody. Welcome to Austin Friends of Traditional Music Online. The Austin Friends of Traditional Music is an organization here in Austin, Texas, started way back in 1974 for the furtherment and encouragement of all kinds of traditional music styles. Normally, in normal times, we sponsor jams and concerts and a big festival in October. But this year being what it is, none of those regular activities are able to happen. So we've had to go online with our activities to the extent we can. And if you go to our website, aftm.us, check out our Real Times newsletter. You'll find some interesting stuff in there that is very pertinent at this time. Our own Chip Bach wrote a wonderful article called Keep On Virtually Pickin', which has all kinds of options, online options for traditional musicians, ways to practice, ways to record yourself, some real good stuff that Chip has come up with, and that's in real times, and the article is called Keep On Virtually Picking. There's also a link to Terry SoRelle's Song Circle, and if you follow that link, he'll hook you up with some other activities. The Stone Soup Jam has an online component now, and there's a Celtic Jam that is online. So there are ways you can play with others, even though you're sequestered at home. And today we're going to have the opportunity to talk to two people who are sequestered at home. They are brothers in music, and they're actually brothers too. And one of them I'm familiar with because I get to work with him on the AFTM board, and that is Mr. Terry SoRelle, who I'm looking at right now. Terry, how are you doing this day?
I'm good. I'm good.
Terry is the webmaster of the Austin Friends of Traditional Music, so it's his handiwork that you will see on the website at aftm.us. And we're going to meet Terry's brother, who is not in Austin at this time, and that's Chris SoRelle. Hi, Chris. How's it going?
It's going. I'm still alive and kicking.
Clearly. You look very much alive here on the screen anyway. Well, as I said, Terry is an Austinite, a proud member of the Austin Friends of Traditional Music, but we got to talking about how he got started in music, and the story of the family of the SoRelles that got started in music is a very interesting one. So starting with your parents, I was wondering, did your parents grow up with live music in their households as kids, do you know?
They grew up with some classical music, played live, of course, but not so much traditional music. It was later, when he left home, after the war, World War II, and got interested, and I don't know when he got interested in these things, but by the time I was old enough to listen and to sing, he was listening to a lot of classic jazz and folk music of various kinds, and I just learned along with him.
So there was music in the household and a nice collection of records, I'm guessing, was building up?
Oh, yes. A lot of old blues records, too. I remember Bessie Smith. And
oh, great.
Well, it was the heyday of Folkways Records. And Folkways, which now has been, the Folkways collection is now the property of the Smithsonian Institution, but they did a tremendous job of recording and publishing and preserving American traditional music, and that was a time. Moash was the person who directed that, and they were and my father was totally addicted, and he would buy these Folkways records, and we'd go to the library, and we'd come home with stacks of records, and of course we had concerts and festivals and various other outlets, but records were stacked high. And one day he decided to learn the guitar and acquired one of those old Silvertone F-hole guitars, very cheap guitar, and we learned together. There's hardly any greater joy than learning guitar together with your dad. Now, we have a little film, maybe it'll get spliced in, of me at the age of, I think, about 8 or 9, taking turns playing the guitar with my father.
That sounds like a great memory for sure. I was just curious, were your father's record collection, were they all 33 and a third, or were there still some 78s?
There were some 78s, yeah, and some albums. the word album, people aren't always aware, comes from the time when they looked like photo albums. Of course, now photo albums are not physical either, but if you remember physical photo albums, it was like that, except that it would have sleeves for a collection of 78 RPM records, which each one of them was, either side would be the track of a long play record later.
Yeah. And Chris, now do you remember, you have early memories of your father and your brother Terry playing guitar together?
Oh yes, yeah. He was the start of it, and just little by little, more instruments started coming into the family, and there was always a big deal. I'd see Terry get real excited and run out to the truck when it arrived, and it was always just a big joy to get a new instrument in the house. I remember that, and
I can imagine that.
How many of us grew up saying, "Oh boy, Hobart Smith has arrived in the mail"?
Yeah.
Didn't hear that in every household in Dallas, I don't suppose. Hobart's kind of a special guy. What was your first instrument that you got your hands on, Chris?
First instrument that I really stuck with was auto harp. I guess around 8 years old, started picking up the auto harp, and then there were so many instruments around the house, I noodled with everything. For a while, I was halfway serious about flute and bagpipes. But the auto harp was the main folk instrument that I had up, and I fooled around with everything and got more and more serious about the banjo about the time I left the house, and I moved to Denver and traded a flute for a banjo. And a couple of years later, I started playing fiddle. And when I was a kid, among other things, we listened to some Cajun music, the Balfa Brothers, and I remember Ambrose Thibodeau, and of course Conrad Fontenot, Creole. But there was something about that fiddle style that just haunted me, and when I picked up the fiddle, I decided that's the kind of fiddle I wanted to play. And little by little got more and more involved in Cajun music.
Yeah. Back in the earlier days, how many members of the family were participating in playing music? The three, you two guys and your father, but were there others that were playing?
When the third brother, Pete, came along, he learned to play the pick and bow, which is an instrument that it's a bow with a guitar string, goes wang, wang like that, and you play it like a Jew's harp or a nose whistle. And that was his instrument for a while. And but anyway, my father and I played guitar and banjo, and then we acquired auto harp, mandolin. What else, Chris? There were all sorts of things around the house. And,
oh God, there was.
Yeah.
We went to Pier 1, Cost Plus as it was back then, and there was the banjo. You remember that, where it just had these. It was like strings and a keyboard, like with typewriter keys, and it was like it had stops rather than frets. You push a typewriter key and it would stop.
Oh yeah, I remember that now.
Those flutes, God knows what else.
Yeah, like old Underwood typewriter keys, right?
Well, I just wondered, your family was about as musical as it could be, it sounds like. Were there any other families that you knew that you could get together and play music with? This is all up in the Dallas area, correct?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there were the things.
We got involved in the Dallas Folk Music Society, and they had a monthly hootenanny, which, if you're old enough to remember that term, is basically a jam and song session. And we would go to that monthly, and there were a few people who had, maybe a couple, but not many whole families that were involved in that. Of course, we got around that. We were invited at one point to go to a folk festival, the Covington Folk Festival in Covington, Kentucky, across the river from Cincinnati. And there were several family acts in that. I remember the Beers family. Do you remember the Beers?
Oh yes,
I remember. They were from the Midwest, somewhere, Milwaukee.
And they had a psaltery.
A big hammered dulcimer, yeah.
Yeah, it was a hammered dulcimer. It was big, box, and I think they call it a psaltery, I think.
Yeah, and his wife and daughters played with him, and you know, so I think there's a strong tradition of family music that's around in these kinds of things sometimes.
Yeah, I had the Beers family record in my youth.
Ah.
I know that for sure.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that must have been fun. Y'all jumped in the car and drove all the way to Kentucky?
we must have, unless we went on the plane.
Yeah,
My
that's
my dad worked for the airline, so plane travel was cheap.
I see. Uh-huh.
And you know, besides folk music and jazz and that sort of thing, there was a really strong interest in international music and in Mexican music in particular. And we would get on the plane with our standby passes and go to El Paso and go to Ciudad Juarez. And my dad would take us to bars to listen to mariachis and to hear street musicians and such. And that was part of our musical education. But we both sing in several languages. Chris actually speaks them. I just fake it.
Yeah.
Can we stop for a second? Yeah, those trips to Juarez were like, I don't know, that really stuck with me all my life. A minute ago, I was trying to think, you know, who are my heroes and this kind of music and that kind of music, and then I thought, well, you know, the Mexican records, Daddy, every time we go to Juarez, we'd come home with more records of these corridos and such, and I never knew who the musicians were. As a kid, I wasn't paying that much attention. I was paying more attention to the music than the musicians, but I have no idea who those people were.
Well, he found obscure records like the Mariachi Infantil, which was an orphanage in Juarez, you know, where all the kids played mariachi. It was a very nice album.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, you know, when I was, okay, so when I was 10 into my teenager years, this was the crest of, you know, what Arlo Guthrie called the great folk scare of the 60s. And we listened to some of the earliest of that music we listened to were songs from the labor movement and people like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and the Almanac Singers. So that was an early influence on me. And then as I said, the Folkways records came around and we got sort of deeper and deeper into the original music from which this folk revival stuff was springing.
Yeah. Well, as Chris mentioned, he made an excursion to the Denver area. And Terry, I think you left Texas at one point also, isn't that right?
Yes.
I wanted to add a little something that popped in my head about our influences and our differences. And when you started playing music, you know, it was the folk revival and whatnot. And when I got into it, I started to get in on the old time thing, the string band music. And it occurred to me that our heroes, the Seegers, yours was Pete and mine was Mike. Mm-hmm. Not strictly, you know, but
no, I mean we all listened and played all of this stuff at one time or another. But I think, you know, it was when do you cut your teeth?
Yeah.
You know,
right.
And I learned with Pete's how to play the 5-string banjo. Yep. And so that whole style has been very much a part of what I do. And I think you began to learn banjo from the round top type folks like
exactly.
Cal Reed.
Yeah. I was really
we both listened to Hobart's Man.
Yeah.
Were any performances that you attended where national performers came to the Dallas area with playing the kind of music you were interested in?
Oh yeah, I'll let Terry take over on that end of things.
Oh, okay.
Yes, more.
Well, I remember the Weavers coming, which was actually after Pete left, and he wasn't a member of the group then, but it was still the Weavers, and they were great, and would hear international music like Ravi Shankar heard this was when he was kind of unknown, and then later on there were a few concerts and events that I remember that totally knocked my socks off and were a really deep influence. And one was when the New Law City Ramblers came and played a concert. And that's, I think, the first time I heard music that was really identified as old-time country music. Now, I heard a lot of things that would qualify as that, but this was more the traditional Charlie Poole style string band. And I'd never quite heard anything quite like that. And that set us off on a particular direction. But the one that would really knock my socks off was in a little coffee house in Dallas. The folklorist Ralph Rensler had collected a group of musicians, traditional musicians from North Carolina, who included people like Tom Ashley and Roscoe Holcomb, and a young blind guitar player named Doc Watson. Mm. And that moment of sitting there and listening to those guys play, and then this rippling, beautiful guitar emerging from the whole thing just riveted me. And so that was a big one. There were several. I remember, Chris, do you remember visiting with Ramblin' Jack Elliott?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, and these were in little coffee houses. There were just a half a dozen people around, and so.
One other fella, Mass Lipscomb. We saw him at the Dr. Pepper bottling plant, had a little auditorium, and we went and saw him there. I was probably about old enough where I really started remembering things and attaching to these memories, but we got invited down to Mance's home, and so we drove all the way down to Navasota, and I remember when we got to Mance's place, he was out in the back in a shed skinning jackrabbits for the dogs. Remember that?
Yes, absolutely. That's and this was when we played together, and Mance told me, he said, son, I think you play me better than I do. Of course, he was way too kind to say that, but he was a very sweet man.
How great to have met Mance. His music is absolutely wonderful, I think. And as you say, he's a Texas hero from Navasota, Texas. And that was quite a jaunt from Dallas, but well worth the trip, I'm sure.
We like to take these little road trips. Another Texas blues man that I learned a lot from was Lightnin' Hopkins. And blues was a big part of my repertoire all along.
Yeah. Well, you got kind of bluesy for a while with your music, Terry. Is that right?
Well, when I moved to Austin, this was the summer of 1967, of course, and I had to get in a rock and roll band, and I ended up in a blues band that played Buddy Guy, B.B. King kind of stuff, and we were called Lord Greystoke and the Southern Flyers, and we went off to San Francisco, and the whole trip.
It's a beautiful story.
It was fun. It didn't last. My career as a rock musician did not last long, but it was fun.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, as you said, you had spent some time in Colorado, and I know they have a wonderful folklore center there. You spent quite a bit of time at that organization, I guess.
Yeah, hanging around. I took clawhammer banjo lessons from a guy, I can't remember his name now, but I think that's when Wade Ward became a big influence on me. And of course, I had contra dances and people getting together at the folklore center and whatnot. So little by little, I started getting into old fiddle tunes on the banjo, pretty much.
And at what point did fiddle get into your repertoire?
Well, at one point, it was about my mid-20s or early 20s, I guess, and my grandmother had a fiddle that had ended up with Terry, and it ended up in Terry's basement, I think, and glue coming undone and whatnot. And at one point I said, if you're not going to mess with that thing, can I have it? And so, yeah, it's been one of my favorite fiddles since, my grandmother's old fiddle. But like I say, when I heard Cajun fiddling as a child, that really grabbed me. And that's what I started, was Cajun fiddling, little by little, meeting Cajuns. And so for fiddle, and I'm getting around to the old time music, the Appalachian stuff just now.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice because all these old tunes that I remember from my childhood that I kept telling myself all these years, gee, I wish I could play that on fiddle. Now I can.
Uh-huh.
There's all
With
these.
multi-instrumentalists, I'm always interested in what instruments they're concentrating now. Is the fiddle taking up most of your attention at this time, Chris, or are you spreading
I
yourself around?
Well, yeah, I'd say the fiddle is kind of takes most of my attention, but now that
Uh-huh.
I'm retired, I'm messing around with everything. But
Mm-hmm.
fiddle to me is just an amazing instrument, and it's the devil. But once you get it licked, it's like you can do anything on a fiddle.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to, where I might say I'm almost mastered some instrument. I don't think I'll ever, with a fiddle.
Yeah.
Just keeps
And
going.
Terry, I've primarily seen you playing banjo and guitar. Is fiddle part of your repertoire, would you say?
Well, it was. It certainly was when we had the family group. I played a lot of fiddle,
Uh-huh.
but now, well, what happened was after living several places in the country and having two or three professions, I returned to Dallas to find that my two brothers were playing rings around me.
Sure.
Pete, the pick and roll player, had learned the guitar and became a superb guitarist, really good. And I had, in the meantime, somewhat let my musical skills languish a little. But then, yeah, I got back and listened to them, and it really inspired me to sort of brush up and revive my own music. Now, I think, again, one of the stylistic differences, and this isn't all one way or the other, but I've always been mostly a songster, a folk singer, that vocal music, and my instruments have primarily been for accompanying my songs. And the fiddle's primarily, though of course it can be used as an accompanying instrument, but it's primarily the sort of thing you'd play for dance music and in a band and so on. A lot of old time music. There's the old ballad traditions,
Hmm.
but then there's also the string band traditions. The singing and the dancing, and so the fiddle. I just didn't play the fiddle as much, and I've at one time or another played mandolin and auto harp and all kinds of
Everything.
things. But in my dotage here,
Mhm.
I just concentrate on the guitar and the banjo.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm pretty sure you're both playing quite a bit these days. Are you both retired from conventional jobs at this point?
Yes, we are.
Fortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, sadly, our third brother Pete, he passed away in May
Mhm.
2018 of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and not much to say except that we miss him.
Yeah. There's a couple
Certainly.
things about Pete, and I just want to mention that when Terry and I were elsewhere, he also played with a band called Identity Crisis, and it was pretty bizarre makeup. He played guitar, of course. There was another guitar player, and um, oh, can't remember his name, but anyway, accordion, and Al Beck's wife, on clarinet.
Yeah,
And
he branched out a lot. He was a
he did,
tremendous
he did.
musician. I did
His
some
tastes
other
were very
things
eclectic.
too.
Yeah.
But during my time in Portland, I did, I was involved very much in the social change movements. So I was in a band that actually came out of the anti-nuclear movement. It's called the Lonesome Neutron Band. And so I did that during that stint.
Hmm. You've been in Austin how long now, Terry?
Let's see. It was um, 1998 when I moved here, I think.
Ah,
So it's been about 20 years. Now, I
yeah.
had lived in Austin during the 60s and 70s, so it was hardly a familiar place because it changed so much. But
Mhm.
I always had fond recollections of my earlier times here, and
Yeah.
was delighted.
Did you get involved with the AFTM pretty promptly after you moved to Austin this time? Or?
Well, eventually.
Yeah.
One of the things I started doing was in order, I wasn't involved in a band and I wasn't playing live music. So really, more or less, to have an incentive to do music, I set up a website, which the idea is it's an online songbook, and I tried to post as many of the traditional songs as I could think of, and I did maybe one a week for a while. And there's around 200 songs on the site, and each song is a page and has the lyrics are there and a YouTube video of me playing the song, and so that was my big project, and it's still something that I do. And you know, I think one year I went to the Midwinter Festival, and they were looking for somebody to do the website. And once I started doing the website, then I was on the board, and you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's been quite a boon to me. I've enjoyed AFTM. It's a great organization.
Well, as we said earlier, Terry hosts a weekly song circle, which is on Saturday afternoon, and you can get a link to that at the aftm.us website. And can they also find your online songbook through that route, Terry?
Yeah, I think so. I'll make sure there's a link there. It's the URL is fairly easy to remember. It's terrys-songs.net. terrys-songs.net. And I'm sure you can find your way there. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, are you doing any online playing these days, or is there any YouTubes available for our viewers to check out your music?
Not yet. Maybe with Terry's help, I can get some things on YouTube. But yeah, I've been. I'm probably the more technically inept of all three brothers.
Yeah.
Especially now one passed away.
Well, Terry has great digital skills, as we all know, at the AFTM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have a couple little YouTube videos that were taken, you know, with the phone at a SoRelle Thanksgiving, and they're pretty crazy, but you might have fun looking at them. And it does feature all three brothers. The last we'll see of Chris, but
that would be great to see.
But mostly it's fun because it's just a family occasion. We're playing music, and the kids are, you know, trying out the harmonicas and stuff like that.
Well, hopefully
you could just search for SoRelle Brothers and you'll find
SoRelle Brothers. Yeah. Oh, and your interesting last name is spelled SoRelle. Almost, but not quite like the bootmaker from Canada, right?
Well,
I had a pair of SoRelles when I lived in Minnesota, for sure. Yeah.
My wife is more into the genealogy, and growing up, I wasn't sure where it came from. People said it was French, and my daddy, he lied and said we were Cajun. But I ate up that story, of course. As it turns out, we pretty much came to Texas in the wave of Southerners from Georgia and Alabama and you know, Tennessee, you know, and along with one of those waves. However, there's pretty good possibility we might have originated in French Canada. The name it's French, but then it's also, there are a few English SoRelles, but I think it originates as a French name.
So you're a natural with the Cajun music then, Chris.
Well, I suppose.
And you still sing in French, correct?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Terry mentioned about being the singer in the family, and I've always been real shy about singing until I got into Cajun music. And then I had to sing because I was the only one who spoke French.
Chris has the enviable talent of being able to learn languages easily. And he's worked as a translator in Spanish and Vietnamese, and
Ah,
Like I
And
say, I fake it, but he actually knows what he's saying when he sings these songs.
that is an enviable talent. Well, you guys are just a talented pair from a talented family, clearly, and it's been a great pleasure
Oh,
talking to you. I think we might see some snapshots and videos spliced into this video when it's completed online. I look forward to seeing that.
mhm.
It's really been a pleasure talking to you, gentlemen. I hope
Uh,
it's been fun for you guys.
Gary, I wonder if we could leave with just a little fragment of a couple of a song from me and a song from Chris, just
Oh,
to
that would be
give a
ideal.
taste of it.
That
Uh,
would be absolutely ideal.
uh,
Terry just happens to have a
I
banjo
just
within
happen to have a
reach.
banjo.
Yeah.
Don't leave home without it.
Well, I got a couple back here.
Well, as I said, Pete Seeger was who I learned the banjo from, and I've always thought that Pete is one of the more underrated banjo players because he was able to take the instrument and do things like blues and flamenco and African music. There were just no limitations on the banjo as far as Pete Seeger was concerned. So I've tried to take my inspiration from that, and one of the things I do is some blues on the banjo. And this song was one of the earliest blues songs that I ever heard. It was in my dad's record collection, and it was recorded by Bessie Smith in sometime in the 20s, along with a backup guitarist named Lincoln Conaway. And I've sort of modeled this banjo arrangement on his playing. And it's called Mean Old Bedbug Blues. That bedbug sure's evil, he don't mean me no good. Yes, that bedbug sure is evil, he don't mean me no good. It's just like he's a woodpecker, and I'm a chunk of wood. When I lay down at night, I wonder how can a poor man sleep. When I lay down at night, I wonder how can a poor man sleep. When one is holding my hand, the other one is biting my feet.
All right. The Mean Old Bedbug Blues. Pretty nice, Terry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris, are you going to favor us with a tune?
Sure, why not?
All right.
I guess I'll go to the first instrument that I ever had any competency in. And when I first started playing the auto harp, I remember playing at the Hootenanny once with the auto harp in my lap, playing Shenandoah. But shortly after that, I started listening to Mike Seeger, and was my hero for the auto harp. So one of the first tunes that I learned to play pretty proficiently was an old ballad called Fair Ellender. And I'm not going to sing the song, maybe just a verse, because much too long and much too bloody. But let's see, something like this. come riddle to me. Riddle at home and one and tell me where to, Master Ellen, or bring the brown girl home. The brown girl, she has house and land, fair Eleanor she has none, and they're not charging with the blessing. Bring the brown girl home.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. That's Chris SoRelle on the Mighty 36, as it's called in some circles. Well, it's been a great pleasure, gentlemen. I bet it's been a while since you got to physically play together in the same room.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that will change in the not too distant future. We all are anxious to get back with friends and families and get picking circles going again. But we have a few options on that website that Terry so carefully manages. So check us out at aftm.us and you can find out about these options we've discussed. My name's Gary Mortensen, and we've been talking with Terry and Chris SoRelle, a musical family of Texas. Thanks so much for watching.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes, little boxes, little boxes all the same. There's a green one and a pink one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.
Unto this country a stranger I came. I courted a fair maiden, and she was her name. I courted her for love, and her love I didn't obtain. Do you think I've any reason or right to complain? I wrote to see my Nancy, I wrote both day and night. I
I'm a roving gambler, gambled all around. Whenever I see a deck of cards, lay my money down. Gambled off in Washington, gambled over in Spain. On my way to New Orleans to gamble my last game. Had not been in Washington many more weeks than 3 when I fell in love with a pretty little girl and she fell in love with me.